Want to get back to a big story we've been tracking as the man accused of fatally shooting the CEO of United Healthcare outside of a hotel in Midtown Manhattan will go before a judge next week. Luigi Mangione already appeared in Manhattan federal courtroom Thursday on federal charges of murder and stalking. Monday, the 26-year-old is expected to be arraigned on state charges related to the December 4th murder of Brian Thompson. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office has charged Mangione with murder as an act of terrorism, which carries a maximum penalty of life in prison. While New York does not have the death penalty, the federal charges against Mangione make him actually eligible to be put to death if convicted. Mangione's lawyer said it's a, quote, highly unusual situation for a defendant to face simultaneous state and federal charges. Just days ago, Mangione was transported nearly 300 miles from Pennsylvania by air, where he was arrested, over to New York, where the crime happened. Investigators allege when they took Mangione into custody at a McDonald's in Altoona, he had the gun that was used to kill Thompson. They also say he had a spiral notebook that included handwritten pages expressing hostility toward the health insurance industry and wealthy executives. A lot to discuss as always, so I do want to bring in Eric Subin, a New York City trial attorney at Subin and Associates. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning.
Sure, my pleasure. Nice to see you.
All right, so Eric, I do want to ask you, because we've spoken several times since all of this did unfold, and I want to get your take here as we are about 2 weeks, a little bit more out from all of this. What has stood out to you so far about the case as it's played out?
Well, I think the most interesting or unusual thing is that the federal government swooped in as soon as Mr. Mangione landed back in New York the other day with their own indictment. And instead of him being brought to New York Supreme Court to be arraigned on the state charges of murder in the first degree, murder in the second degree, and so on, they took him to federal court instead. Now he's in a federal detention center. Also, the federal government's put forth a seemingly different theory of the crime than the state indictment puts forth. The federal complaint states that he, engaged in interstate stalking to assassinate one person, whereas the state indictment says that he was engaged in an act of terrorism that was designed to coerce a government and invoke terror in a population. So these are sort of competing theories that apparently are going to proceed along a parallel track, which is pretty unusual. The state case should really have precedence. It was the first filed indictment, and essentially at its most simple, it was a guy who came to New York and killed someone. So really the state of New York should be the one prosecuting him right now.
We know that there was a lot of talk about him going to Rikers Island to be held there. That's obviously not where he's held. So do we know why that changed, if there was a last-minute change or if it was maybe some incorrect information? Do we have any sort of clarity, I guess, on that right now?
Well, definitely. Had he gone to New York Supreme Court and been arraigned in the state case for the state indictment, like he was supposed to, he'd be in Rikers right now, because Rikers is a detention facility for people facing state charges. MDC, which is where he's currently being held, is a federal detention center where you go when you're remanded without bail pending a federal trial. So because the federal case, got him before the state arraignment, that's why he ended up at MDC as opposed to Rikers.
The death penalty, we've talked about how New York doesn't have it, but because of the federal charges, that is now on the table. Is that a possible scenario where if he is convicted, he is actually sentenced to death?
It is a possibility. The U.S. Code provides for the death penalty as a potential sentence in the event that someone is found guilty of murder with firearm. The decision is ultimately left to whoever the U.S. Attorney General is, at the time. So if that's Pam Bondi or whoever Trump ends up appointing, that's the office that will ultimately make the call as to whether or not to seek the death penalty for the charge.
Let's talk about Mangione's quote-unquote fan base that continues to show its support. We know that we saw folks who were outside the courthouse over in Pennsylvania the other morning that were wearing Luigi hats from the Mario Brothers game, and you had other folks holding signs that said "Free Luigi." So is that fan base a good thing for the defense, and could it factor in anywhere down the line?
Yeah, probably. The prosecution is sort of seeming to lose track of the narrative here. At its simplest, this is really second-degree murder. It's a a guy, whether it's Mangione or someone else, who came to New York and with the intent of killing someone, killed them. I mean, that's second-degree murder. I guess because of all of the media coverage, the prosecution is sort of turning this into a bit of a circus. I mean, that perp walk that he had from the helipad the other day, I mean, that was like El Chapo coming back, not, someone who was essentially being charged with second-degree murder. So they're losing track of the narrative. The narrative should be, this is a guy who killed someone because he doesn't like where he works. Not this is an act of terrorism or something. They're making it a lot bigger than it needs to be, and those are going to be much, much harder charges to convict on than just keeping it simple and not losing track of the narrative.
I know that with most cases, it can take a while for something like that to go to trial. But as we know here, we have the intense scrutiny, the national scrutiny that is on this case. Everyone is watching it so closely. It's all over social media when you open up your feeds. Does that change anything about how quickly it goes to trial? Do you see this go a little bit faster than maybe your normal case?
I would think it would move pretty quickly. I mean, cases in federal courts didn't certainly move very quickly, but even in a state court case, I would anticipate jury selection beginning in 2025. I don't think that we're looking at a years-long wait, especially they've already done a deep dive into the discovery. So unless the parties, the defense attorneys and the prosecution agree that they need more time for some reason or other, I would anticipate that the judge is probably going to put this on his docket with pretty high priority.
Again, assuming this goes to trial, that's obviously a big if here. Could it be difficult to seat a jury just based on, again, all the eyes that are on the case?
Most definitely. Ideally, for a jury, you need impartial people that are not coming in with any preconceived notions about the defendant or the case or the facts or the sentencing or anything regarding that. And there's not probably a person in the whole world, let alone in New York, who doesn't know who Luigi Mangione is, doesn't know about the facts of this case, didn't see the sort of the theatric spectacle of that perp walk the other day. So, some people are going to have very positive sentiments about him for some reason. Some people are going to have very negative sentiments about him. So if anybody's coming in saying, free Luigi, or if anybody's coming in saying this guy killed someone, he should face the death penalty, those are people who can't possibly sit on the jury because they're not, they're biased and not impartial. So to find people who are essentially a blank slate, which are ideal jurors, is going to be very, very difficult because this is only going to continue to snowball as you get closer to jury selection.
And I'm not familiar with all of the laws overall, but I know in Pennsylvania, cameras are not allowed inside the courthouse. So we were not able to actually see the arraignment itself and the preliminary hearing, the extradition hearing. So we weren't allowed to see that firsthand. I believe New York does have similar laws, so I don't know that we'll see inside the courtroom there either. My question for you, how do you feel about cameras being in the courtroom? Do you think they should be? Do you think they shouldn't be? Does it change anything overall about the case?
Personally, I think they should be. I'm a believer in the concept of open court. I mean, the trials are not supposed to be held in secret. So I think anybody who wants to go and observe the trial and view the evidence for themselves and follow the case, should be able to do that, especially in a case where you've got sort of the masses really watching and, a debate sort of coming out of the set of circumstances. It's really best not to sort of lose track to, false narratives and what people are saying, on the internet. If you have a firsthand account of, witness statements and the evidence and the arguments and the legality of things, I think that benefits everyone.
All right, Eric, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and break it all down. A big story here that we will continue to follow as everything does develop. Thank you again for taking the time. Do you have anything that you want to add before I let you go?
Just that I really think the prosecution needs to keep a clearer focus on what exactly is what happened here and what their job is. What happened here is that one man shot another unarmed man in the back, presumably because they didn't like where he worked. That is a crime, and that's a crime you should be prosecuted for. And turning this into sort of a feeding frenzy for the fanfare and for social media is not really serving justice to the victim.
All right. Thank you again for taking the time to join us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Good to see you.